Right. Hello, everyone. Today is Monday, February 10th. This is a edition of the biweekly SIG release meeting. This is a meeting that is recorded and available on the internet. So please be mindful of what you say and do. Please be sure to adhere to the Kubernetes Code of Conduct. And in general, just be awesome people. So we've got a few agenda items. The first of which is mine. So I recently enabled a set of plugins for the repo for both the SIG release and the Kubernetes release repos. Those are the release notes plugin for K release only, um, as well as the merge commit blocker plugins and the missing label plugin. So the merge commit blocker plugin does kind of what it sounds like. If there is a merge commit within your PR, it will block the PR from merging. So don't have merge commits in your PR. The missing label plugin is more interesting, I guess. It's one of the plugins that we use on Kubernetes to enforce the usage of kind and SIG labels. So for the Kubernetes release and Kubernetes SIG release repos, I've enabled the plugin for both kind and priority, which means moving forward, you should begin to, if you haven't already been doing so, make sure that you're putting kinds and priorities on your issues. This is something that makes it easier for us who do triage to figure out what is more pressing and who to assign what to. The release note plugin you're familiar with. Anyone who's worked on the release notes tools, you're also familiar with that. Basically, as part of the new issue and PR templates that are in K release and K SIG release, they have a block for release notes. So, or rather, it's just on release right now. It's just on K release. So the idea there being we can dog food our own tool, right? And as we're moving towards having the repo versioned and thinking about branching strategies for the repo, it would be good to also be able to aggregate all of the release notes across PRs without having to manually collate that stuff, right? So that's why those are on. I sent an email to both the release team as well as the release manager's aliases earlier today, detailing all of what I just said. Right. The last point on that email was a note about commit messages, and that's the second point within. Also, anybody who is interested in taking notes, feel free to put yourself down as the note taker. I'll have that illustrious honor. So the second point was about commit messages. I am guilty myself, and I think we all are occasionally, when we're working on PRs, to not be as mindful, definitely when the PR is in progress, about what the commit messages are, right? Commit messages are important. They're super important. They describe what happened and why it happened and how it happened. So I've noticed quite a few PRs that have had less than ideal commit messages. And I want to make sure that, like, us, especially as the SIG who makes changes that have the ability to affect pretty much all of the Kubernetes repos, we want to be mindful that we're providing good commit messages. Within that email, I linked a really good article that lays down like what you should put in a commit message, what should be in the body, what should be in the footer. So please take a moment to check that stuff out, and in general, do make better commit messages. The last piece of the whole issue and PR templates thing is, now that they're enabled, please do not remove them when you are filing issues or filing PRs. They're there for a reason. I've already noticed that some people have removed the template information while filing an issue or PR. So please make sure that you're filling out, like, so people who are coming to it and may have no context about why that PR or issue exists have the appropriate context. Okay, that's my spiel. Tim, do you want to add to that?
No.
Cool, awesome. All right, moving on. The next one is from James Laverack around the release notes.
Hello. I wasn't necessarily expecting to talk to this terribly much. This is something we were discussed a little bit in the release notes kind of sub team for the Kubernetes 118 release team. Whereas right now we have a relatively manual process as outlined in our role handbook. And we wanted to try and automate that. And we talked about this a little bit internally, and then kind of talked a little more widely with the SIG, and kind of had it suggested this might be rolled into the KREL tool, which is used for releases. I think our current plan is mostly just to talk with Sasha, isn't it? I believe. Forgive me if I'm saying your name incorrectly. It's still new to everyone. To try and find a way of doing that, though I'm unclear on the exact way forward and exactly what we need to do with that. So I'm not sure if there's anything else in particular you want to say, Stephen, or how you
I think
this.
So agenda-wise, that's part of the reason why I've stacked these two together. So the next piece would be an update on the progress for KREL. And maybe we can start with the changelog and what the plans are there. I know that there's been a lot since we've last talked about it.
So I should do the update first, and then we talk about the step regarding the changes necessary for the release
start
notes.
with start with the changelog update.
All right, so you can find the basic tracking issue linked in the release in the notes. It's 918, and basically we are all set. So the changelog is working right now. I did some optimizations which go beyond the actual migration from Bash to Golang. So for example, we decided to sort the nodes alphabetically and uppercase the first character so that it looks clean and nice. And yeah, this works right now. The only thing we have to add is the integration testing, and the integration testing part is mostly done. It works that we pre-record the API from GitHub, and then we replay that API and check if the results coming out from the changelog tool are the same as we would expect it. So that's the basic approach, and this works pretty well. So one example PR would be this one. So there you can see that we have a lot of JSON files added to the repository, which allow us to replay the API from GitHub without accessing GitHub at all. And then we are mostly done with that. So we can still enhance testing. So this is obvious, we can do it as well. And we have to move forward with the push build tool, which is, I don't think it's completely done, but maybe Dan can update us on that. And there are some other smaller tools like find green build and the release notify tool. And then we are just migrating the huge ones, CCP manager and Anago.
So a question about, so James, from that, what do you need?
So this KREL changelog, does that replace the you're just invoking the release notes tool directly? Is that the intention?
It more or less uses the release notes tool, but it also, for example, modifies the repository during the build process. So we also commit the new changelog into the KK repository after generating them. And the release notes tool is just available for generating release notes. So I think a good next step would be if we have 2 additional features. The first one is about creating pull requests from KREL. So this is not available right now, and this would be a necessary step in my point of view. And the next thing would be a dedicated subcommand for release notes based workflows, which would mean that we generate the release notes for Alpha 3 and then create a pull request to the release notes website via the JSON and the draft in Markdown to the SIG release repository. And that's it, I think so.
Yeah, I think that aligns with what we were thinking. So yeah, I guess we just need to implement that. What's the steps with this then? Should we open an issue and work on that, or?
You created this 1061.
So yeah, I also want to make sure that we, while we're working, no one's stepping on each other's toes. So Sasha, do you feel like you've laid down all the stuff that you need to for someone else to be able to pick this up without rebase issues and all that good stuff?
Yeah, first of all, we have to, I think the most complex part is the actual handling in the repository, because if you want to create a pull request, then you have to somehow commit the changes to your own fork and then create from that fork the pull request to the SIG release, for example, repository. And having that in a single workflow might be more complex than it looks like, because handling remotes and stuff like that. But usually I think it's straightforward to implement.
Okay, so I would say before getting to the niceties, let's just make sure that we can output the website, right? Output the website, the JSON for the website, as well as whatever y'all need on the release note side to commit drafts back to the repository. From there, once that all of that's done, then people can look at doing automated pull requests and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it would also mean that the token has a higher set of permissions.
Yes. Well, yes. Yes. We will cross that bridge when we get there. Right now, the token that's in the repo attached to the stage and release builds is for writing to repos. For the token that you'd be using locally, obviously it's something that you would need to have access to write to your personal repos. It doesn't need access to write to any of the Kubernetes repos. So just keep that in mind. An additional note on Krell, I would like anyone who's working on Krell things to take a step back now that we've had lots of improvement there, and focus on documenting what we've done, because I think that's currently lacking.
Do you think the primary method of documenting is just like within the repo, or are you thinking of actually having like formal docs somewhere?
Okay, so the first step, and at least what I've done for kubepkg, is I would put a doc close to the code. Right?
Okay.
So I'll show you an example. And essentially what I did was just dump the usage, the current usage within Cobra, and add some, here's what we did, here's what we haven't done yet, notes. But eventually, I would like to, I have it on my to-do list. I'm not sure if it is in an issue. If it's not, I can file it. But basically, there was an update to the contributor site that added like release timeline stuff, or links to release timelines. I would like us to build a Netlify site for the release docs, both all of the release manager handbooks, as well as describing how we use the tools that we use, right? I think that some of that is kind of tribal knowledge, where it assumes that you have been working on that tool to know exactly how to use it. So that's kind of why I'm saying now is a good time for us to step back and start documenting what we've created recently. And then, so initially it'll start off close to the tools, and eventually it'll be some tools, doc/tools or something, right, with each of the tools described. on a pretty site.
With respect to close to the code, do people still use GoDoc anymore? I feel like I've been using it forever, but I don't know if it's kind of fallen by the wayside. Do you all use it?
I use it, but it's one of those things where the having someone say to you like, well, the API is documentation is like not a great user experience, especially if the API isn't properly documented. So
yeah, I see those as like I totally agree we need the bigger picture, but if somebody's just consuming from an API perspective, that's the one place I tend to use GoDoc still is like, oh, there's a nice API. It's got nice documentation. It's authoritative because it's in sync with the code.
In the code. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, totally agree. I think that the stuff that we've been writing recently has been nicely documented, fortunately, within the code. So that could totally be a start. Rajiv, you linked the Swagger documentation. Do you want to talk about that a little?
Yeah, generally, I mean, for API documentation, Swagger is best option we have. So can we use something like that for API documentation of Go? Or do you think it's a good idea?
I mean, it should be fine. I'm not sure what does it get us outside of what we would be getting from GoDoc.
So just get a request, a port request, or any other request, and the example of it, how it would be, and then the result.
Okay. I think we can put it on the list of things to consider, maybe, but I would prefer any effort in documentation to be pushed towards clean user documentation as opposed to API documentation. Like people who are writing the code today continue to write clean code that's well commented, and the people who are going to be focusing on user-facing documentation should spend more time doing that than implementing this. Not saying that we can't do it. I don't think it should be our first focus, though.
Okay. I think those two overarching goals that we have good documentation for the maintainers of the project and good documentation for the consumers of the project. The specific implementation of those might not matter so much, but I mean, we got into that with GoDoc, obviously, and Netlify or whatever, but Swagger is certainly a common one. I feel like Swagger, it does have some additional benefits, but I also feel like it comes with some, as with any of these, maybe besides GoDoc, where it's completely automatic if you just do the right thing. They come with a maintenance barrier.
Yeah, that's my concern. But again, not saying that we can't add it later. I just don't want it to be the first focus there.
Yeah, and as we add it, to be thinking about automation to try to understand how to do better about not letting it just drift away into staleness.
Yeah. All right, cool. Questions, comments, concerns regarding, Dan, push build.
Yeah, I'm still pushing through on that one. I haven't had a lot of time to work on it, to be honest, but I hope that this week I should be able to have some bandwidth.
Cool, awesome. So not on the schedule, but announcement. Dan has been doing some really awesome work on the release engineering side. So we have decided to make him a release manager associate officially. I actually was surprised that he was not already, because he does a lot of that work already. So thank you, Dan, for your continued efforts. Dan will be cutting the 118 Alpha 4 release tomorrow, as long as we fix the issue that we currently have with it. So maybe I should talk about that a little. Yeah, okay. So essentially what happened is, I think during one of the releases, the most recent release, 118.0 Alpha 3, one of the jobs failed, and the job is responsible. So I think it was the CI Kubernetes build job. And that job is responsible for essentially pushing builds, right? So the push build rewrite that we're talking about is a rewrite of a script called push build in the root of K-release. And that script is responsible for pushing builds, pushing CI builds to CI bucket, as well as changing the updating the version markers that we use. So if you've ever seen something like dl.kates.io /ci/ latest.txt, right? That's one of our version marker files, and it represents the most recent successful build version. When that job failed, it was almost immediately after the release, which means the way that we interpret the build versions, essentially we look at the version marker and then use that information to decide what the version of the release is going to be. Or there's another more complicated way that we do it that I don't fully understand yet, which is what I'm going to be spending the day with, I think. Essentially, we did not bump the version marker to the correct version. Rather, they're currently running at 118.0-alpha.3- some build version -git SHA, right? So it should be, actually it's .2 build number -git SHA, right? So when we send a staging job into GCB, it's looking to see if the current tag for that branch is behind the build version. If it's behind the build version, it won't build, right? So that's currently the issue. That tag should have been, once we let out alpha 3, one of those build versions should have been bumped to alpha 3 build number -git SHA, right? So we need to figure out how to bump that version so that it can actually build alpha 4. I've written up an issue about it, which maybe explains it a little bit more eloquently, with some build logs as well. So that is here in chat. And if someone can transpose that into the notes, that'd be great. So yeah, I'm going to be investigating that. Okay, yeah, that's it for push. That's it for push build, at least. Any questions on that?
Do you think there's any chance at this point from your initial debug that we broke that in our tweaks for the
previous patches?
The bigger Anago issue?
It's possible, but I think it has more to do with I don't think we changed anything related to the version markers. So I think it's a failure of that build job. And that build job may be based on something that could be looking at Anago, but I don't think it is. That's one of the bootstrap scenarios. So CI Kubernetes build uses the Kubernetes build bootstrap scenario, and that one I think just does the make release, and then the make release that's in Kubernetes followed by a push build. So
we did change the ordering of things within the prepare and tag tree, and somehow there might have been yet another implicit assumption there.
Possibly.
On the ordering that we've invalidated.
Possibly. It's also possible that the way that it kind of coalesces the version is based on partially based on the job results cache.json. There was an issue filed for that by Ben a few releases back that was not high enough priority to take a look at, but I think it is now. And I can almost guarantee it has something to do with the code that coalesces that build version. Yeah, fun. So any questions on that? I also did a test of, so I tested this from, the reason I discovered this was, the way I discovered this was I was working on a change for something entirely unrelated, and I noticed that the change failed. So I have a feature branch called prototype that's essentially testing the what it would look like for us to be able to run the staging and release jobs on Kubernetes infra as opposed to Google infra. That issue, that PR is here. And essentially what happened was, well, it failed. The staging job failed. And I thought it was related to the PR or something I missed. And then I tried it on master as well, using against Kubernetes release master, and noticed the same thing was happening. Basically, it says that the build version is old, and the workspace is unclean. The Inago workspace is unclean, so it's not going to build the build. So in the background, I've been working on a staging job that runs on Kubernetes, that runs on the Google infrastructure to test whether or not we can do the staging job, right? Just, it's a very simple, like, GCP manager stage master, right? So that job has been failing because the, well, one, you can send, we could have that job be successful by simply not asking it to pull the logs, right? So basically looking for the success of the job within Prow. But then that wouldn't tell us what's going on with the job ahead of time, right? So I made a change to Inago, or to GCP manager, that allows the that allows you to flip the async flag for the Google. So basically, GCP manager is a wrapper. For people who are not familiar with this stuff, I know I'm like going into the weeds. So there is a so GCP manager is essentially a wrapper for the substitutions that we provide to the gcloud build submit command, right? So basically, we have templates for to run Inago commands. Inago is our primary release engineering tool, and those are in GCP stage and or release cloudbuild.yaml, right? So basically, we run it through GCP manager. GCP manager spits out a set of substitutions for those commands, and then submits the build, right? So as I was looking at this and realizing that the async was failing, flipping on or off the async bit was failing, I said, well, we've got to fix this, but does it make more sense for me to try to fix this in GCP manager, or does it make more sense for me to start to rewrite GCP manager? So I started to rewrite GCP manager because no more bash. I'm kind of sick of it. So if you, I think I listed this on the agenda, but if you check out this PR, it's the initial commit of the Go-based GCP manager. Essentially, what we've been doing, if you're familiar with the image building process, we have a tool that was worked on primarily by Catherine in Test Infra that kind of does a very similar thing, right? It figures out the substitutions that prior to submission, and then does the thing, right? So you wire up a Prow job to do image building. You specify some like git tags and the pull ref and a few other things. If you want to see one of those jobs, if you want to see an example of that, it's basically here, right? So you have your GCP steps listed. There are things like git tag and go version that it uses internally to figure out what to substitute, right? So I was working on this a little earlier, and it's at a place where it's doing more than it was before, at least. So we can check it out really quickly. right? So we have a little script called compile release tools that you can specify one of the tools within CMD in the repo, and it will run go mod outdated. It will pull the dependencies, and then it'll install the tool, right? So we can see Krell. So if I look at Krell help right now, right, we can see that there is a new GCB manager command available. And if I do Krell GCB manager -- stage, right, something like that, this will eventually fail, but it does kick off the build. And we can see that that actually starts to run within GCB Manager. And the biggest thing I was looking at was the async flag. I know that these, proud jobs triggered off of the GCB builder or image builder or whatever we're calling it today. I call it GC builder. So you can see some substitutions. I have some fake information in the code right now. So fake build point, fake version, fake build version. Needs to be fixed. Fake user, so on and so forth, right? But this is further along than it was before, and I'll wire it up so that like we can flip the async flag again here. But essentially, what it's doing right now is it's streaming the logs directly to my computer, right? So this is essentially the experience that we want within Prow, so that we can see that the stages are actually running successfully. So yeah, that's in progress, and it seems to be going well so far. This also brings in the GC Builder tool, which so I need to figure out with Catherine exactly how we want to do this, whether we want to fork off of it or move it out of test infra altogether, and point the tool to a SIG release image, right? That's using that tool. So essentially what I did was I took the tool GC Builder and pulled out all of the useful stuff into a library, which is build.go. So that's available, or will be available once the PR merges, at package GCP build.go, right? So the functions that are there are then used in the GCB manager.go subcommand of Krell, right? So you can see essentially it's doing, it's basically looking for, one, it's making sure that you don't specify both stage and release. It's doing a set of GCB substitutions, which are, these are some of these fake values that I created. And also allowing you to specify the release tool repo if you want to target this against a fork, or you want to, and if you target against a fork, then targeting against some branch that you have on that fork. And then a simple switch and some cases for stage or release. So if you were to look at GCB Manager today, you'll see that we kind of have a similar situation going on. It will take commands like list, stage, stream, stage, or release, and then if you look at one of the functions for stage it or like release it, they're basically doing yeah, so release it, right? It's checking to make sure you have a branch set. It's setting the cube cross version. Right now we have a dummy version in GCB Manager, or a working version but it's hard coded, and then finally does the submit it, right? And then submit it is right here, and submit it is doing, as I mentioned, it's essentially aggregating a set of substitutions to provide to the gcloud build submit command, right? So this is this async flag that I was talking about, and then the async flag. Ooh, I did the thing. Yeah, so that's that work. Hopefully, it looks like it's moving quickly, so I might just be able to complete it this week.
A quick question back at the end of that, and this is maybe a philosophical one for the group. For people who haven't done the build and seen what goes by in GCB Manager, one of the things that you would see is a whole bunch of preparation in terms of getting modules, like what Stephen showed there with the compilation step. That compilation step local mildly freaked me out because it was a whole bunch of get latest. We had a slight issue recently where the latest bash broke us magically. Like, these dependency management is a thing we should be thinking about, but we're actually in a really bad state on that. If you look, I just pulled up one of the logs, and I see. Wait a second, come back here, mouse focus. 590 equivalents of get during our build. That's in the cloud, so we don't see any of it, but that's stuff that we need to think about managing as we shift over things from bash, where it was completely implicit, to Go, where we have mechanisms for controlling it. We need to think about controlling it. But I would assert that a portion of that we should be thinking about limiting that. How can we have as few external dependencies as possible? Because 590 or whatever it was is a scary number. Anybody else have thoughts on that? No? Cool with it? Like, it's cloud, it's magic latest, just do it, fail fast, fail forward? Or given our current issues, are people maybe a little skeptical that path is viable long term?
I like the idea of versioning and getting something in there, some dependency management, because like you said, I think if you haven't bitten by latest, you will be bitten by latest at some point in time. I feel like I've still got some bruises that have still not healed from that process.
And this is what CI is for, right? Like, you can observe that newer is available, you can put it into test, you can prove that you're okay with it outside of production.
So I think one of the things that we'll be able to start doing, if you notice in some places in our GCB templates, we do have explicit version set, and in some places it's set to latest. The reason we have it set to latest in some places is so that now that we're kind of iterating over this stuff quickly, and it's nice to be able to know that the latest version of what we did in the repo will be produced in CI. But I think as some of this tool creation starts to slow down, we should start locking in some of those things. I've totally lost my thought. So I think, give me a second. Bart, I know you were saying something, so go for it.
No, I just wanted to say that I agree. And I feel like we should start to think about it sooner than later, because when, for example, we'll have like a huge pile, even bigger than now, of the dependencies, it will be harder, much harder. And I feel like we can do already with some small steps, we can block it. And I don't think that it needs to be done 100% at this point, but I feel like it is important to start working on that.
Okay, now I remember what I was going to say. And it's about the variance file, right? So moving GCB GC Builder over here, allows us to, I mean, while moving it doesn't really do anything, but using GC Builder allows us access to what we've been calling a variance file, right? So the idea with a variance file is that you'd be able to produce a set of images or a set of things, right? For the release variants, we actually don't use. I'll show you the release variants too. Right, so within GCV and then build. So this is like our prototype job to test this out. But you can see the variants specify whether or not it's running in CI. So this is a variant name, and then the variant name specifies a set of substitutions, right? So this one, I know we're running in CI. This is like the old CI configuration. I think these are somewhat equivalent, roughly equivalent outside of the registry and the bucket name right now. But the idea here is that we'd be able to specify a set of variants and target a variant. So one example of that is if you look at the Kubekins E2E variants, right, where we specify config as experimental and then Go versions and different versions, right, that may skew from what's used on master, right? So when the Kubekins E2E images are spit out, it will walk through all of these variants and produce or all of these variant names, right, and produce images based on the versions that are specified here, right? So you can see that, you know, for master and 117, they're roughly equivalent outside of the Kate's the release version. But for experimental, you see the Bazel version is different, right? And you see that upgrade Docker is specified, right? So this image will try to upgrade Docker within the script that's nearby. Right. So, you know, like there's right. So it'll if this is flipped to true, it'll try to do an upgrade of Docker, right? But normally it won't. It'll just stick with whatever version of Docker is produced within this bootstrap image, right? And then layer on top whatever versions we specify for our Kate's release version, our Go version, or the Bazel version, right? So I think we can, using the variants, I think we can do something similar and think about the external dependencies that we have and try to and try to be a little bit more stringent about the things that we do there. There's also how to spell. Right, so there's also, is it hack? And verify external dependencies. Okay, all right, so we have a script in hack called verify external dependencies version.sh, which eventually runs CMD verify dependencies.go. I had sent out an email about this a while ago, I guess, last year sometime. And someone reached out to me and was like, oh, this is really cool what y'all are doing. Essentially, this goes through a set of dependencies specified in some YAML as you do, and looks for a reference path, right, and a regex match, right, and we'll try to verify that the places that you have specified in the match, or the places that you've specified in the reference path, match the version of that you've specified within within this dependencies.yaml. So build dependencies.yaml, and you can see we've started to do this for the Kubernetes repo, right? So we specified etcd, the version, and then the places it's located in the repo, right? To make sure that, like, as long as these ref paths are up to date, the version should all match, right? So we can start to do something like that in Kubernetes release as well, once we start to really target what our zeitgeist. So the guy who reached out was working on essentially extended this work, and I noted on this issue, but we haven't had a chance to talk about it yet. We can probably work on that for maybe the release engineering meeting next week. So there's an issue here where we initially started talking about it, and it's in the chat now. Okay. So, come on. All right, so he wrote this tool called Zeitgeist, which is a language agnostic dependency checker, and it does something very similar to what I described and showed you with these ref paths and these matches, extended to support a host of different tools like Helm or FluentD versions and so on and so forth. So we should maybe consider checking that out. So, I mean, general thoughts about that. Okay, Dan has a thumbs up.
I'm mildly skeptical, having written something like that before. It's in the attempt to manage these things, we tend to start building tools naturally, and across all of the patterns, it's really hard to come up with a meta description language and mechanism around it and policy around all of that covers all of the different possibilities. And then you also have a kind of garbage in, garbage out problem, because as with our bash example, like, of course we depend on bash. This is a whole bunch of bash. But there's a ton of things that are just implicitly assumed, and there's a fan out across that. So you might depend on something and it's being provided by the thing that you requested, the Helm chart, but that depends on a specific version of Ubuntu perhaps, and all of the packages that happen to be in that specific image, and it gets really complicated. But so I'm cautious when I hear that here's a tool that will magically cover all the variations. I mean, I wonder if we're prematurely optimizing there versus trying to grok the actual list of things that we care about.
So I think that, you know, the part of using that tool is explicitly defining the things that we care about. So I don't think that we're kind of casting off that responsibility. It's doing essentially what we wrote. So the Yassine, I think, originally wrote that, the verify dependencies.go, and we need to expand on some of it to allow us to allow multiple approvers, right? So that's something that was on my plate. But we also need to, I mean, we need something, right? We need something, and essentially it's the more sophisticated version of specifying a version, looking through all the files in the repo and seeing if that version matches relative to something, right? The bash one, like you said, is a little trickier because I mean, it doesn't need to be, I guess, because we could specify a version of bash.
Yeah, it depends on rigor. Like, we can't depend on kubekins. We have to depend on thing in kubekins, and
right.
There's layers and layers of what's really kind of laziness or lack of rigor all across the software ecosystem that will keep biting us.
Yeah. So I think we should try to have maybe a deeper discussion about the verify dependencies stuff. My one concern about using an external tool as our ability to manage it, manage and update it. But if it is a net improvement to what we did in verified dependencies, I do think we should check it out. As long as we're not trying to boil the ocean with it. As long as we keep it simple and we're just like, here's a path, here's a version, I think it's usable. All right. So we've got a few more. Bob, you want to kick those off? I don't remember if I saw Bob on the call. Okay, yeah, Bob's here. Here-ish. Okay. To set it up, Bob was, he's having mic and camera issues. But Bob was doing some triage of some older issues and bumped into two of them around the kind test category, adding a kind test category, and then also one for renaming the release note star and cherry pick star labels. For the label side, basically renaming these labels to conform with the area category, the area category kind of setup that we have for most of the labels. So if you see like SIG/foo, right, or area/bar, conforming the cherry pick and release notes labels to do the same. And then the second issue is adding a kind test label, which we talked about a while ago, but I'm not sure if it's required. So yeah, Bob, please. Okay, your mic's still jacked.
Hear me now?
Yeah.
God, I hate this dock. It's been causing me more problems. Anyway, yeah, I've been going through just like all the issues that like Contribex is a part of, trying to see sort of where they are and if it's still like worth poking them. And these two came up, like they've had a couple of pokes that have reopened them, but they keep going into stale. And I mostly just wanted to see from the release side, is it still worth even, you know, having these open? I think like, especially on the release notes site, we now have the release notes site and adding like some of the label stuff. So I think at least that portion is done. And then the other one, the kind test one, has been debated back and forth and was reopened with like, someone should ask, like, it was like kind woof. And so I think they can probably be closed. I don't know if there's more to get out of them being discussed.
So today we have an area test label, right? And the area test label will trigger if it's described in the owner's file for some area, right? So if you had, so you know, theoretically, if you had an owner's file within a test directory of some repo, you could add a label to automatically add area test to it, right? So we have a solution at least for PRs, right? But for issues, I think the original idea was like, well, what if we're trying to describe a test that we need, or so I think what we were originally thinking about is something like kind test plus area component, right? Whatever component this test would be related to. But I think that that's just as easily solved with area test and area some component. I don't think that we need a kind test label anymore. But if anyone from CI Signal or anyone who generally has opinions about that, yeah, go for it.
Okay. Sounds like no.
All right, excitement abound for the area test labels. Let me give me a chance to just go through this issue again, and if it doesn't make any sense, if it doesn't make sense anymore, I'll close it.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I know they're like backlog, low priority. I've just been trying to go through and clean things up.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. The second one we can probably fix.
It's been open since 2016.
Yeah, yeah. Little by little. So I think Aaron said if we are going to do a rework of this, whenever he said it back in this issue, that it would make sense to also make sure that the labels conform. So we can do that. The cherry pick one, something that came to mind, Tim and I were chatting about it a while back, was the idea of a cherry pick / command, right? So maybe cherry pick approve or something like that. So that maybe we could do it as part of that rework. Yeah. And the cherry pick approve command would do something similar to the / approve command, except it'd be restricted to people who are in the release managers or patch release team, GitHub teams, right? And that would allow them to flip the label from do not merge cherry pick not approved to cherry pick approved, or cherry pick.
Is that documented any place, or is that was more so just a conversation?
Yeah, it's documented on our side, or whatever our side is. I've got it in my to-do list, I think. But we should, I guess we should add it to this issue. So yeah, let us action on those two.
Okay, cool.
All right. So I had one more that was on this list for the KK image building, but Hannes is not here, and I think there's an unresolved comment that he made on the PR. So let me, before we go, let me just link that PR to the agenda. Yeah, so this is the unresolved comment. And I guess we will see you all later for those who are showing up to the 118 release team meetings ahead of next week and weeks in general. Please, if you have topics that you want to discuss during the SIG release meeting or the release engineering meeting or the release team meetings, be sure to add them to the future topics section of the respective agendas. All right. Cool. Thank you, everyone.